incredible to have you in my home this morning. It's been a while, social distancing, so it feels absolutely amazing to get to engage in such an authentic way. I'm going to share my screen as we get started here. I have the privilege and the responsibility to talk about purpose in the time of COVID, which was not where we thought we would be when we first started talking about this virtual event. And it wasn't supposed to be virtual in the beginning. So the responsibility feels really big because there's so many people that are really working at what their purpose is and how they show up in the world and focus on the world that we want. So I just wanted to take a moment and just acknowledge that before we get started. And to get us started, I'd actually like to invite us to take a collective breath together. Just on the count of 3, maybe we can all take a big inhale and exhale. Truthfully, that might have been more for me so I could calm some nerves, but I also believe in the power of doing these things together. Before we get too far into it, I need to thank Justin for setting the stage in such a beautiful way. Justin, you gave me goosebumps while you performed. The words in your music are medicine, and I think they will heal the world, and we need to hear more of that in mainstream places. So my ask of all of you is to go download Justin's song, share it with your family and friends, and let that be the kind of music that lifts us up and moves us forward. To get going, I'm going to introduce myself to you in a bit more of a fuller way, if my screen will allow for that. There we go. So my name is Jace Meyer, but who is Jace actually? Well, I self-identify as a woman from Turtle Island. Turtle Island is the traditional name Indigenous people use to acknowledge North America. And more and more, I'm really trying to use the traditional names of places as a way to really help myself feel a deep sense of belonging and connection to the land. I'm grateful to live here on Algonquin territory, but I'm a settler here. I am not Algonquin. And so I really do see my role in this space as a guest, and I'm working to be a respectful guest and have meaningful relationships with the people who have been here since time immemorial. I am a Métis woman. Métis folks, by definition, are free people that cannot be owned. And so my cultural understanding and the way my people have lived has always been one of real focus on self-identity and self-discovery. And so that really shows up in who I am in the world. On that note, and like my people, I am nomadic. I have lived 27 places in my lifetime, and that has forced me to build some skills around meeting people and showing up and finding roles and connecting with people that I've never met with as rapidly as possible so that I can try and build community. And that really shows up in my identity. Being Métis also means that I am both Indigenous and French Canadian. And in some respects, that makes me a half-breed. That term, though, has been very difficult for me to work through. And often it shows up as the struggle about whether or not I am enough. And it wasn't until I moved to Ontario that that became a really acceptable thing to talk about, enoughness and my halfness and my half-breedness. And so that's something that I actively struggle with. But I'm trying to embrace, and I've come to a place in my life where I realize that it's actually quite powerful to be mixed, that I have a foot in 2 worlds and can walk both and belong to both and connect those 2 worlds like a bridge. Now, going back in history a bit, my mom and my grandma is where I get my indigeneity from. And my grandma was a residential school survivor, and that inflicted a lot of pain and shame into her life. She was taught to rid the Indian of herself and to really feel deep shame about her indigeneity. The truth is I didn't know I was Indigenous until my grandma died. That was something that there was so much shame around. We didn't even speak about it. And so lots of intergenerational trauma. That pain really showed up in my mom It was difficult for her to mother at times, and addiction and mental health often overcame her ability to really be present. I forgive my mom, and I love my mom, and I accept my mom for all of that because I recognize it's bigger than her. That really is what intergenerational trauma is, and that is the byproduct of colonization. And so ever since I was a young girl, a very young girl, I knew I wanted that to be the last time that intergenerational trauma affected my family. And so I've carried out everything I've done in my life as a means to break the cycle. And so that caused me to grow up really quickly. And I was very often responsible for my family from as young as 7 or 8 years old. And so what that presents and what that offers me is perhaps a little bit of an accelerated pace at reaching my purpose, because that was really integral to my ability to survive and one day thrive. So into adulthood, to unpack a bit more about who I am and how that's kind of translated in healthy ways over time. For those of you that are familiar with Enneagrams, I'm an equal split between being a 7, a 3, and an 8. 7s are our enthusiasts. They want to make sure everything gets done and they want to experience everything. I'm also equally motivated by challenging the status quo and making sure that people get what they need. And I'm exceptionally motivated by helping other people reach their potential. So that really shows up in all of my Enneagrams. And the reason I believe I was asked to speak on purpose is because I'm very blessed to know my why, to be able to communicate my purpose. And I will share that with you by the end of our session today, but I'm not going to share it with you up front because I don't want this to be about my purpose. Rather, I want this to be about your purpose. So what is my definition of purpose? My definition of purpose is when you put your gifts into action. The action part is really integral to me. I think we actually are living out our true purpose when we are applying it, and we feel much better when that part is active. And so the gifts into action is my definition of purpose. So what are your gifts? This is something that adults struggle with. This is something that I've seen women struggle with. And this is something I've seen Indigenous folks struggle with because of the pressure to be humble and the pressure to be, not too bold with our gifts. But I would love for us to break that stereotype because it's very important for us to be able to talk about our gifts proudly and share them with others. And so I believe your gifts are your skills, your knowledge, and the attitudes that serve you joy. The things that you're really great at, the things you know a lot about, and the way that you feel towards things that really fuel you, that to me is your gifts. And so when you can put those into action, that's when you're living your purpose. Now, I want to share with you my bias before we get started. So my bias is that I believe you are the consequences of your actions and not the product of your circumstances. Now that's integral to who I am because I came from a broken home. I came from a history of a lot of pain and trauma, but that is not how I want to be defined. Rather, I want to be defined by the things that I do, my ability to put gifts into action. So my offer for us today is not for me to tell you what your purpose is or should be, and not even really for me to share what my purpose is, but rather to offer you some of the tools that I have found to help me not only defining my purpose, but being able to communicate that quickly with others. And then the greatest gift of all is time, time to action these tools. One of the things that I've come to realize about myself is it's so easy to put yourself last on the list. And to take time to self-reflect and work on ourselves can be very scary. And it's very easy to Netflix and chill instead. So the gift this morning is time to really self-reflect and have a healthy conversation with ourselves. And so it's your choice in how you use this time. For some of you, you may be feeling like you really know your purpose and you're here to be surrounded by others that do and are working on theirs. For others, you may be in a moment, especially because of COVID-19, where you're questioning your purpose and how you're spending your time and showing up in the world and what you want to do next. So you may be in a place where you're working to define your purpose, and you might be in a place where you're working to redefine your purpose, and both are okay. So take the challenge that makes most sense to you today. And it's my hope that you can tell yourself the truth today, because really the purpose starts right here. And I've been on a journey for the last few years since I became a mom to really focus on reconciliation. It's been a huge political buzzword in Canada, our country, in the last number of years. And while I'm so grateful that that's a topic of conversation, I don't believe that any one systemic change is going to help us through reconciliation. Rather, I think it's every individual's responsibility to approach reconciliation with themselves. So for me, reconciliation starts with self. And in order to get to reconciliation, you got to be willing to acknowledge the truth first. So tell yourself the truth today. And then trust that we can hold your truth, that this community of creatives are here for you and there's space for your truth. And then finally, my hope is that you feel confident sharing your purpose with others when you leave here today. And why do I hope that you feel confident sharing your purpose? Well, I believe that when you can share your purpose with others, it's the fastest way to build healthy relationships and to start meaningful business partnerships and really to live the good life. So are we ready to get started? Maybe we can get some hands in the air so I know that you're still with me. Amazing. Amazing. My screen's blowing up. This is great. Okay, so the big reveal, here are the 5 tools that have been the most impactful in my life in helping me to define and communicate my purpose with others. We're going to dig in one tool at a time. We'll have time to go through 3 tools today, and I'll walk you through the final 2 tools for homework if you so wish. So the first tool is really about going back to the beginning. So we are going to go back to our 7-year-old selves. The reason we do this is because when we're 7, we're at a social and cognitive development point in our lives where we have a really emerging sense of identity, and yet we are also not completely affected by what others think of us. And so it's this really sweet spot of self-awareness without being completely overwhelmed by the expectations of perhaps your gender or your place or how you fit into your family. And so from my reflection, 7 is a place where there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of joy and freedom to play. Might not be true for everyone, but the starting place I'd like you to begin today is asking yourself who you were when you were 7. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to go into some breakout rooms and give you the chance to introduce yourselves to a small selection of folks that are joining us on the call this morning, but you're going to introduce yourself as your 7-year-old self. So you're going to recall how you spent most of your time. So by example, my name is Jace. At 7, you would have found me at school asking teachers about what they were doing, in the community telling kids how games work and rallying everyone together to play, or out in the creek exploring Mother Nature. Now, you're going to enter into some breakout rooms. Be sure to click on the link that'll show up on your screen so that you're entered into those breakout rooms. We'll have about 5 minutes for all of you to introduce yourselves as your 7-year-old selves. I hope that those conversations were joyful and that it was fun to reflect on who you were at 7. For some of you, it might have been a little longer trip down memory lane than others, but I hope you enjoyed the journey. I appreciate the vulnerability that was already shared in the breakout room that I got to join. And again, the reason we start here is because there's a real unfiltered version of yourself in your youth. And if we can go back to those spaces, there's a lot of answers there about what we did to fill ourselves with joy as a young person. And I believe if you can bring some of that forward into your adult life, that it's a really positive way to kind of carry yourself. So we're going to park this, keep this information handy, because we're going to weave it into the next step, which is a little bit opposite of the joy we were just talking about when we were 7. The next tool I'm going to share with you is not my tool, but it's a tool that I found incredibly impactful. I believe the person that taught me this is on the call this morning. So Shauna, if you're here and you want to give a wave and say hello in the chat box and link people out to your work, Shauna Pollock is the brains behind Blue Sky School, which is a innovation school of the future. And it kind of breaks the molds about how school works. And I got to work with Shauna and her students last year as they talked about their purpose and what they wanted to do when they grew up. And rather than ask kids, what do you want to do when you grow up? I've always preferred the question, what problems do you want to solve? Because they probably know more about the problems than the careers associated with those problems. It just broadens the definition. And Shauna pushed that even further. And she said, what are your heartbreaks? What are the things that break your heart, that keep you up at night, that give you sweaty palms? And can you align a lot of what you do in life to making those things better? So the offer right now is to return back to the groups that you were in and share what some of those original heartbreaks were for you. Those might have been things that were personally impactful, and those might also have just been things that you witnessed. But what were some of the first injustices that you realized were happening in the world that you remember? Again, you're going to join into your breakout groups. We're going to share those with each other, and then we're going to come back to the whole group. This time, if you have extra time at the end of your session, please feel free to share some of your reflections in the chat box with us. Okay, welcome back. And first, I want to say thank you, because I asked you to do something very vulnerable this morning with people you may not know. So I applaud you for your willingness to be vulnerable and trust that we can hold your truth in a safe place. And if that was the first time for you, I know how vulnerable and extremely naked sometimes you can feel when you've put out that truth and you're wondering how people are going to respond to it. But you did it, and I hope that you can remember that you can do that. I really have come to learn that when you can speak your truth, there's a lot of power that comes with it, and you start to find others that have similar stories, and that you're not so alone. So thank you for sharing some original heartbreaks with yourselves. To take a moment and pause and reflect on what we've done so far. We talked about the joy we experienced as 7-year-olds, and we've talked about some of our original heartbreaks. My question for the group right now is, by show of hands, how many of you have work that relates to the joys you've experienced as kids and or the heartbreaks that you have? Where can you see yourself show up in that? Incredible. So many of you are aligned to your joy or to some of your original heartbreaks. That is fabulous to see. Wow. Wow. And their hands are still raising. So our next tool is to talk about your gifts. Again, this is the part that makes people really uncomfortable. We have not been conditioned to share our gifts openly, and I want to change that. One of the ways we use the skill identification process in my work at Shopify is to talk about our T-shape. So what is a T-shape? A T-shape is a visual representation of your skills and a way to think about two different types: the things that you're really, really good at and the things that you are okay at. So for me, the deep part of my T, the things that I'm really good at, or maybe my expertise, is around systems thinking and inquiry-based teaching. And because of the trauma I experienced as a child, I learned I was resilient, and creativity would help me solve problems or distract me from problems and give me an outlet. So that is where my skill set is deepest. across the top of my T, I'm an artist. I like to produce content. I coach. I see myself as a community builder. Your challenge, I'm going to give you one really awkward minute to draw out your own T shape. So again, it's wide skills across the top, deep skills down the middle. Aim for at least 3 on both sides. No requirement to do so, but let's take one whole awkward minute as a group to give you the time to put your gifts to paper. I'm going to actually set a timer so that we do this together. So it's going to be awkward. It's going to last a minute. So you may as well just use this time to self-identify some of your gifts. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat. So again, we want to talk about our gifts. We want to make it normal to talk about our gifts. We want to make it easier to talk about our gifts. Why? Well, when you're joining a project, you're meeting people for the first time, if you can communicate your gifts, people know how to engage you when they need you the most. If we don't share those things, we'll never be able to make the impact we're really hoping for. The first step is being able to self-identify them and then have the confidence to share them. It's nice to kind of see it in this visual way. I love it because it gives me permission to have gifts that I am an expert at and gifts that I can develop over time and I can collect over my lifetime. So this T-shaped model that we use at Shopify, I have found to be a really great tool, and I hope that you find it useful yourselves. It's also a really great one to do with your kids. So if you're at home and you've got the kids behind you, all of these tools can be done with children. And there's a blank T-shape here, just to give you a visual of it. And the next task, the homework. So this process of identifying your gifts isn't easy, and it might be uncomfortable. And if that's the case for you, then the homework is to go and ask an elder for their observations of your gifts. Now, in the Indigenous context, elders are people that are respected in their community. It doesn't necessarily mean they're the oldest person in the community, but definitely someone that holds themselves with high regard, high respect, and the community sees as that. Another way that I like to think about elders are the people that respect you and bring out the best in you. So the invitation here is for you to figure out who respects you in your life and what gifts did they observe in you. Can they help round out the list of gifts you just created in your T-shape, and maybe encourage you to be a little bit more bold in communicating really what you're great at. Another way you can fill in those gaps is to reflect on what is it the community asks of you? What do people ask for you to do when there is a problem or crisis or something to be done? Are you the person that gathers people? Are you the person that can work the budget? Are you the person that's behind the scenes of the camera? That often, the things that the community asks of you is them asking for your gifts. So you can think about it in 2 different ways. So that's our 4th tool, is our elders' observations and what the community asks of us. Reflect on that. And the final one is another tool that we use quite often at Shopify when we are designing new products, and that is to ask ourselves, why? Why do we think we need this? And not just to do it at the surface level and be happy with the first why, but really to dig down deep and find the root cause. So it's simple. You ask any question and then you ask why 5 times. So why do you do what you do? This is a question you can ask yourself. It's a question you can ask your partners and the people that you're quarantining with right now. And the goal here is really to go deep, to be honest, a little bit more closer to the truth. So, really quickly, why do I do what I do? Well, I'm a teacher by training. I do that because teachers were really impactful in my life. And why? I enjoyed going to school. It was a safe place. Why? Well, because there was a lot going on in the home that I wasn't sharing with people. Why? It keeps going back and back, and it gets into more of the root cause. So again, one final tool for homework that you can do as a next step to some of the conversation that we've had here today. And that's 5 tools to help you unpack your purpose. Really, my belief here is that when we can find joy and apply our gifts to the things that give us heartbreak, that's where I think purpose is found, is in that braid of those 3 things. the joy, the heartache, and the gifts. Now, I'll share that it doesn't mean that you have to have a trauma-filled childhood to have a purpose. By no means is that what I'm saying, and I hope that's not the case for the majority of people in the world. In fact, research would say that most people actually suffer to find purpose after coming through that. Again, I didn't want that to be my statistic or my stereotype, and I really worked hard to break that cycle and find purpose for myself. Purpose can come to you throughout your life. You don't necessarily have to have been born with that purpose. It can emerge over time. So if that hasn't happened for you, give it time. Give it time. It's not a race. But really, it requires a lot of self-reflection over time to do this. And without the tools, it's hard to walk ourselves through this. So in trying to prepare for today, I really wanted to prepare things that are applicable for you and that are action-oriented. So I hope you find these tools useful. And to round out, I promised you I would share my purpose at the end. I did that because I didn't want to influence your thinking today. But my purpose is to build experiences with communities where people are offered equitable access to knowledge, where they can fail in their pursuit to self-actualize and feel a deep sense of belonging without bounds. That is completely rooted in the things that brought me joy, building community and hanging out with kids. It's completely rooted in the original heartbreaks I experienced of not belonging and not feeling that I could fail as I was learning. And it shows up in everything that I do. And so I'm a teacher by training. I self-identify as a teacher, but that's not my job title, and that's not what I do at Shopify. So why do I do what I do? Well, I can apply my purpose in many different respects, regardless of the job title. And so I'm the lead for Indigenous entrepreneurs at Shopify because of a profound experience I had watching my mom receive an entrepreneurship education in a rehabilitation program that changed her life and changed my life. I saw the power of entrepreneurship to help people self-actualize, be independent, establish confidence, and the means and ability to be independent. And that to me was absolutely profound. And to work at a company that was helping more people self-actualize and become independent and see themselves as capable of holding value and being paid for that value in the world was the greatest opportunity I could really see ahead of myself that allowed me to align my joy and my purpose and my original heartbreaks all together. So I want to say a huge, profound thank you for you being so vulnerable with me this morning and sharing so openly. It's really my hope that you were able to tell yourself the truth, that you trusted us to hold your truth, and that you can leave here feeling more confident sharing your purpose with the world. With everything going on right now, it's a moment of absolute rebirth, reclamation, and change. And I personally feel that it's our responsibility to live the lives the best that we can in hopes that it shapes a better world for all of us. It won't be handed to us. We have to be willing to put our gifts into action to make it happen. So thank you so much for having me here today to share in such an interesting moment in time. I hope you find these tools useful, and I hope you're willing to share the outcomes of this work with me on social through the Creative Mornings hashtags. And I honestly just need to say thank you one more time, Miigwech. This has been an amazing experience for me. I hope it was impactful for you. Jakota, Max, Marwan, all of the support in bringing this together. I'm entirely grateful. Thank you, Ottawa. Thank you, Creative Mornings.
Hi guys. Jace, thank you so much. That was incredible and actually very emotional. I don't know if it's a combo of the topic and like the fact that we're all isolated and we're all coming together via screens, but it's awesome. My question was about the T shape. I think like a lot of people, like I saw in the chat, I definitely struggled filling mine out. But also, I think where I struggled the most is I don't know how vague or specific you should get in terms of what those skills are, regardless whether they be wide or deep, just like what constitutes a skill. And so, yeah, I guess my question was just, could you give us a little bit more guidance in terms of how to maybe find what to put in there or how to define it?
Yeah, certainly, and not uncommon. We don't talk about this a lot. It seems like once we are kind of through K to 12, we kind of stop talking about skill development actively and what are skills. So appreciate that. I think the reflection is really spot on. Skills are the things that you can do. The knowledge are the things that like you've come to learn. They don't need to be unique to you, you know. So maybe you're a biologist and you have deep understanding of how, you know, biological systems work. That's a knowledge thing that's really important, and could show up there. It could be as simple as, you know, I have great ability to know flavors and I can put together a meal in a pan. Like, it doesn't need to be resume material. Okay. So it doesn't need to be something that your employer is going to want to see. In fact, it's probably way more interesting if you kind of avoid the resume. And that's really why I think the T shape, although maybe awkward at first, gives you maybe more permission to avoid the resume speak, and to just be a little bit more honest. Like maybe you can whip up a great makeup face. Like maybe it's that you have a green thumb in the garden. It could be as wide as really you make it. But again, if you're struggling, ask your elders and ask your community, what do they see as your gifts? And I would tell you, like, it's way easier to say the gifts of others than it is of ourselves. So have some conversations around that with some folks in your life.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Jace. I don't know if you remember me, but I remember that I saw you. Yes. And I think this is brilliant. Like, and I also love that we went back to when we were 7 years old. Like, just like it's almost like we're always these people. We always had these gifts. I think that's amazing. My question is, can your purpose change, or does your purpose just mostly stay the same throughout your whole entire life, or does it like change in circumstances or the things you do?
Grace, what a brilliant question. Grace is one of the students of Blue Sky School. So we worked together talking about purpose a few years ago now. So Grace, it's amazing to get to see your face again. Brilliant question. I think, yeah, your purpose can change over the course of your life. I think it more so evolves, but I think that you can have very profound moments in your life that shape you to your core and require pivots. I've had to move a lot, meet lot of new people, find a lot of different new jobs and titles, and really reinvent myself. And that has been a struggle because some people would say that's inauthentic, that to be able to kind of change or shape shift between different worlds. But also, I think that's a lot of who I am. I can, you know, go to a black tie and then go hang out and listen to some country music. Like, so I've needed to adapt, but that doesn't mean I'm being inauthentic, because I'm still showing up as my whole self when I'm there. But I've had some really profound changes in my life. One of them was brought on by a, a cancer scare that really made me stop and go, am I living out my full purpose? Am I really showing up as who I want to be in every aspect of my life? And it caused me kind of a moment to recalibrate. I realized that, you know, on the work end, I was really investing in that. But on the social family side, I'd let it slip because I was so caught up in the rat race of what my job was. And so I really took my purpose and just tried to make sure it was being applied across all of my life, not just kind of limited into this work box that I think society makes us pay way too much attention to. And COVID is helping us see that, right? That family and spending time with our friends and building community is really important. And we miss that when we don't have access to it. So yeah, I think purpose can evolve. Sometimes massive life events might have us kind of stop and maybe take a new path, but it can build throughout your life. So it's a bit of a mixed bag answer. I realize it's not the clearest, but I think we need to be open to what the world is and needs from us, and how we grow and learn over time too.
Jace, thanks so much for your chat. That was really great. I really enjoyed it. So knowing myself, like I'm gonna take away this information and probably, you know, go away and focus on sort of more imminently stuff on my to-do list and that sort of thing. And, this sort of stuff will get kind of pushed to the side and that sort of thing. And you've obviously shared these exercises, which are great. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what have you found successful in terms of ensuring that, you sort of you take the time to sort of focus on this and ensure that sort of doing some of these exercises and sort of checking up on this, on a somewhat frequent basis. What have you found successful in terms of making that a part of your life, sort of thing?
I sign up for Creative Mornings. That's kind of a jokey response, but truthfully, I put myself last. I struggle to apply these things in my life, but working with others through that process gives me permission to do it. So I seek out opportunities where I'm in group doing this and not so much in isolation, so that others can hold me accountable. And I actually use the 1 minute time frame I'm given in those things. And so that I also don't feel alone with anything that might come up in those moments, right? Like what we did was vulnerable today, especially if we don't do it a lot. So I've literally just found myself gravitating towards people that want to spend this time on themselves, so that I'm not alone in it. And let me just think on that to see if, I think anytime I'm feeling overwhelmed, stressed, and down is a moment I ask myself, like, what's out of sync? Where am I spending my time? Is it on the things that matter most to me? And can I maybe recalibrate some of my priorities a little bit? So when I'm emotional and feeling like I'm breaking or, things aren't going well, that's a moment for me to go, something's not aligned right now. And maybe it's time to kind of go back and reflect. But really, I gravitate towards others to do the work.
Cool, thanks.
First of all, Jace, thank you so much for showing up here today. And this is the first time I'm actually hearing about Creative Morning, so super excited to stay engaged in the future. So this is really timely for me. As I mentioned, I'm reading the book called Untamed by Glennon Doyle, and she talks about 10 years old being kind of a pivot in our lives where we start to be tamed. So my question to you is, what was your favorite thing to do when you were 10 years old? And are you still doing it today in some way? And can you think of something that may have, that you may have been tamed by in those early years? Because as I'm reading this, I'm starting to unlock a lot of things, and things are starting to really make sense for me. Mm-hmm. So I just wondered where you were in that.
Yeah, great question, Melanie. It's so great to see you this morning. At 10, so that's grade 5, I was volunteering in a daycare. And I was a peer buddy and a student council leader. I had a lot to say about what was happening and not happening in classrooms. I remember standing up and stomping my feet that Peter wasn't getting the help he needed, and that was unfair. So I was already advocating for others at my own expense. So where was I tamed? I was told to sit down and shut up an awful lot. I've been told my whole life to care less, and to be happy with the status quo, and that this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, and really to be very grateful for everything. And I'm grateful, but I believe better is possible, and I'm not satisfied with the status quo, and I really never have been. And I will always use my voice to advocate for others, and to say what needs to be said, even if it comes at my own expense. And so, yeah, I was sent back to my desk. I was in the principal's office. I was having to explain why I wrote, a manifesto, and, tried to get signatures on it. I've always been that person that wanted to kind of create spaces for people, advocate for what others needed. And that was never, ever welcomed. But it's still how I feel like I'm being tamed today. Yeah, I think that being the disruptor has been a title that has been given to me, and I didn't like it at first, but I've started to embrace it.
So that was kind of what I was trying to get at. So at what point in your journey, so she says, you know, at 10 you're tamed, and then at what point in your journey do you go, wait a minute, I'm going to wake up now. I have been dumbed down for so long, and now I'm going to start doing the thing, the purpose project, the whatever it is, the passion project is. So when did that change for you? When did you realize that you had been tamed, I think is my question.
Honestly, I think the realization that I had been tamed didn't happen for me until my early 30s. And when I realized that I was so many statistics that there are about Indigenous women, and that I had been more colonized in my life than I even realized. And that there were a lot of limitations for me as an Indigenous woman that I didn't believe in any longer or ever. And that the only way for me to live outside of those expectations was to live the other life. It was to do the work myself, to decide that I was going to narrate my own life, I suppose. And so, yeah, probably turning 30, it was when I was like, this is my life. I'm going to tell the story, and I'm not going to let others tell me how to, what I'm allowed and not allowed to do. And I honestly think that is exactly the Métis spirit. It's those that cannot be tamed. It's literally the definition. So I guess I'm living out my what my ancestors dreamed for me.
I think that's probably what connected you and I. Anyway, this could be another Creative Morning subject. We could go on and on. I won't take up any more of this space, but thanks so much for answering those questions.
Thanks for the question, Mel.
In that vein, thank you so much again, Jace. If we can unmute everybody, Marwan, I think we got to give just another applause here. So thank you so much.